basically three big lessons we learned in particular around museums when it comes to the Culture is Digital report. The first lesson learned or outcome was that digitization, which is something that a lot of museums want to do. They want to create 2D and 3D images of their collections and put them online. That can't be an endpoint in of itself. That typically, historically, when people have gone through a process of digitization without knowing what the outcome is, how are they going to use those digital assets, they've not been a successful program. And so we also found that our funders did not want to fund digitization unless there was a true outcome that they knew was going to result from the digitization. What kinds of outputs would happen, who would interact with them, how many people would be interacting with them. So that was one of our lessons learned and outcomes. Another one was about data. Museums aren't using data about their audiences enough to shape their content and what they're doing in terms of their museum programs. And so a lot of what we were doing in terms of the strategy was trying to find mechanisms to support museums and using audience data more effectively to shape their programs and their outputs. Another finding we had was that many museums have a project mentality such that they invest a lot of money in one singular big digital project, and sometimes those projects fail. And what we want people to do is start to think about projects in terms of little small projects in which they're prototyping different types of engagement through digital and getting feedback from the audiences and then looking for more money to develop even further, as opposed to having that big kind of project mentality where oftentimes you invest a lot of money and then you find out it doesn't really work the way that you wanted it to work. Yeah, so I mean, we also found some really great work in terms of digital when we were doing the research for the strategy and policy. One of the things really relating back to the idea about digitizing collections and why you digitize collections, we found the example of Art UK, which is an organization that's charged with cataloging the nation's artworks that are distributed around all sorts of public venues, such as courthouses and government buildings. These are artworks that you see, but you never really realize are part of the government art collection, and most people don't know anything about them. Unfortunately, the staff of Art UK is quite small, and so they were never really going to be able to catalog the vast collection themselves. So what they did is they created something called Your Paintings, in which they create 2D images of everything in the collection, put them online, but then created a tagging service or a tagging capability that allowed the public to actually start to tag and catalog those artworks. And so they had many people getting online just to see what was in the collection, but also then starting to engage with those collections by tagging whether or not there was a woman in the painting, or a boy, or it was red, or it was yellow. And that tagging mechanism was connected to an algorithm that then, once a certain number of people said the same term or the same thing, it would take it into the catalog and it'd be a permanent part of the catalog. So to make that painting searchable by others, actually it was a form of crowdsourcing. So I thought that was a really good project. I think, another great project we found was the National Gallery, which, the National Gallery in London has, relatively speaking, quite a big budget. But what they wanted to do was do a project around connecting all of the Van Gogh paintings that are around the world. And certainly they could have developed a very expensive exhibition, bringing all of those paintings together in London. They could have created a new platform around showing all those Van Gogh portraits. But what they decided to do is use Facebook Live, which is a very low-cost, accessible platform where you've got lots of people on Facebook, and they connected those collections. There's a painting in Japan, all over the world via Facebook Live, and had the curators in each of those museums do a Facebook Live presentation and show the connections between those different paintings. So they actually didn't have a high-cost mechanism. They used a low-cost mechanism that was there to be able to connect those paintings. Finally, I hope you don't mind if I use an example from my own organization in terms of this whole idea of prototyping. At UCL, where I run the museum service, we decided to have a 3D digital program where we were working with researchers who were innovating in terms of the technology around 3D imaging. And what we decided to do was actually not to kind of digitize the entire collection and then decide what we were going to do with it, but what we did is we digitized a small subset of the collection in 3D. And then what we did is we created 18 prototype applications using augmented reality or virtual reality, different types of additional technologies to see how best the public engaged with 3D. So it wasn't just about having a 3D image and using those as a novelty, but it's about what's the best way for people to learn using 3D. And so we tested many different prototypes before we decided what we were going to go to the Arts Council and get funding for. So those are kind of three projects that I think encapsulate where we want to go with digital, but certainly there's a lot more for us to be doing in that area. The most interesting challenges and opportunities that the museums have going forward is to think about new audiences in terms of the younger generation. What our audience research tells us is that current audiences, the older baby boomer age audiences, like really traditional experiences in museums. And so they're really happy with having, if there's anything digital, they're very happy for it to be additional content that they can read. But the younger generation really wants to be able to engage and interact with collections. They want to be empowered to use those digital assets in the way that they want to use it, whether or not they want to curate their own exhibition online or create a film. And I think the challenge for museums is to create tools in which people could think that the resources and the objects are there for them to use, empower them to be able to be the authors of their own stories, and just to basically give away a bit of the authority and power around the museum objects. Another thing I think is really going to be important is this idea of data and how you use data in order to inform what your future program might be. And so I think there is, and this is more of an internal piece that we have to do within our organizations, to be more learning organizations, to use data in a feedback loop that's continuous to improve our operations and really understand what our audiences need and want.